Hello and welcome to Conversation about horror, all things horror. It can range from stuff we grew up on or just like memories of horror movies, just anything.
Yeah.
and and I'm joined here by my friend Darren.
Come on. Good to be here, man. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah. And this is like a first ever like conversation video I'm doing for my horror channel.
Awesome. I had to be the first one to do it, man.
Yeah. I'll go ahead and start with like one of the first movies to like scare us at at a young age.
Okay. Cool. Love it. Because I was asked this question not too long ago, and I was digging in my memory banks trying to figure out, man, what was the movie that scared me, that first scared me? And it was hard to pin down what was the first movie. Um, I would say the one that made a more the deepest impression in me was King Kong when it used to come on,
Yeah.
network TV. Because people would tell me about the movie this before I even saw it and everything, and they talk about the climactic ending. And so when I finally saw it on TV, it was like watching a nightmare because you think about King Kong now. It came out in '33. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, what's scary about that movie? But it was the way it looked. You had that nightmarish look because the backdrops were fashioned off of Gustave Doré's type of engravings and stuff, and just the motion of the creature when you saw King Kong, the way that crazy look with stop motion animation. It was real
Yeah.
but almost surreal at times. So and I remember thinking, wow, later on in life, it's like that's the same type of movement those monsters do on Sinbad movies, and I didn't realize at the time that
Yeah.
it was. But it had everything in it that would scare me, and still have recurring nightmares from it, like the music, the Max Steiner music,
Yeah.
the situations that the guys were in, being chased down by a brontosaurus, and the guy goes
Yeah.
up in the tree and he's stuck there, and the brontosaurus figure out at the tree, am I gonna pick you up? And King Kong finding her, and Darrow in the middle of New York because there's billions of buildings in there. Because I'm like, look, if I was her, I'll be hot. And he manages to find her anyway. He just happens to look through the window. Oh, there you are. And it's like so many elements. Just it had a very profound influence on what scared me. That I still have recurring nightmares
Yeah.
of King. And I think that was, if not the first movie that I saw, it was the one that made the most impression on me.
Yeah. It's one of those groundbreaking movies from back then. Just the effects in it is just for that time. It's just
Yeah,
amazement.
it was revolutionary. I mean, just and for the studio at the time, RKO, to take a gamble on
Yeah.
the monster. We think we are going to have a guy in a costume or something like that, but this guy comes up, Willis O'Brien, with this 18-inch puppet.
Yeah.
And it's like, are you kidding me? You're going to make a major movie out of this puppet? And he makes it work, man.
Yeah.
Mm. Who would have thought? Mm.
Yeah. And you remember the name Ray Harryhausen, if I'm saying it right?
Yeah.
and
Ray area.
and one of his big influences was Willis O'Brien, and he stated when he saw King Kong in theaters, and he was just inspired by it,
Yeah.
and to and it would be inspiration for his career as effects artist.
Yeah. I think they got to collaborate on Mighty Joe Young because Mighty Joe Young was
Yeah,
a collaboration between Brian and Harryhausen. So I guess this is paying homage to the work that Willis O'Brien did for the King Kong movie.
yeah. And also, I think Marion C. Cooper was also involved with Mighty Joe Young, and there was another guy from King Kong who partnered up with Marion C. Cooper. I'm forgetting the name, but
Schoedsack, I think Schoedsack.
I think so. Yeah.
Ernest Schoedsack, yeah.
Yeah.
Ernest Schoedsack, Cooper. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's so cool how they're all involved together in that project.
Yeah, yeah. Is that I think they said Mary St. Cooper, when he came up with the concept of King Kong, it basically came out of the image that he had in his head. It's like, what if there was a giant gorilla standing on top of the Empire State Building fighting off planes?
Yeah.
So it's like, started off with that, and therefore he had to wrap a story around that. And who would have guessed, man? It's such a phenomenal story. Phenomenal story. And a lot of people didn't realize, except for the people that actually saw King Kong in his debut, that the Empire State Building was only like 2 years old.
Oh,
with
wow.
that movie. It was like, they just I live in New York, so if you go to the Empire State Building now, there's a TV and radio and cell phone antenna on the top that was added in 45. So, because I used to always look at pictures of the Empire State Building and watch King Kong, it's like, what is he going to hold on to on top of that building? That little stump. There a long antenna on there, and then I realized they had added that antenna in 45. But a little trivia about the Empire State Building: the reason that top was there, it was supposed to have been a mooring mast for airships.
Oh.
It was literally going to be an airport for airships to come and park at the top and let people off at the top of the Empire State Building, but it didn't work out too well.
Okay. Oh, trivia is so much fun.
Love it.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to talk about one of the first movies that has a huge impact on my life growing up. One of the very first horror movies that I ever saw as a kid was The Fly from 1958.
Oh, yeah.
The first time I saw that movie, I think it was on AMC, when AMC used to be a premium channel, like the other uncut channels. And so my memory of when the fly head reveal scene came up, or even other parts, it's just put chills down my spine. I was freaked out.
Yeah. It was so cool about the movie, a heartbreaking movie, because he didn't deserve it. You know, he was that overreacher type of character where he's trying to, find things that are forbidden in science, using science to do this and stuff like that. But he wasn't really a bad guy. He was a nice guy, blah, 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 but he just had a bad string of luck. So what happened to it, it was very heartbreaking. So I always had that feel about that movie.
The scene where he's writing on the chalkboard to his wife, writing "I love you." Oh, that was.
Yeah. When he was telling her to do that, because he still had enough of his humanity enough to write out that. But man, when they were talking about how, for those who have never seen that fly, I hope it isn't a spoiler or whatever, but how they described how he was killed with that machine and everything, and I was like, wow, you, it wasn't as if you were doing this for self-defense. You did it several times, which meant you tried to kill him. Like, oh. But yeah, that's a. So how you say you saw that on AMC?
At least that's what I can remember. I definitely remember that movie being on AMC at the time. This was the late '90s, if I remember, when I first saw it. Mid to late '90s, somewhere around that time.
Wow.
And I can definitely remember them showing it on AMC Monster Fest in 97, 98, or 99. One of those three.
Yeah. I remember when they did that. And I remember, I think it was during that time on AMC or whatever, it was around the time Vincent Price, Pat, if you can see, I got my Vincent Price shirt on.
Awesome shirt.
Yeah. And I was in grad school working on my theater, master's in theater, and we were doing a show, and that's when announced it was around Halloween. I think it was October 25th, and they said Vincent Price had passed away. I'm like, oh my gosh, man, that guy, he was my childhood, And
Yeah.
if there's a movie, if you would say, like you asked earlier, what earlier movie scared me, I would also have to say Vincent Price movies because
Yeah.
they was from at late night and everything. And he passed away. I felt bad, and that night they did a tribute to him and showed like 4 movies back. And yeah, I have some very fond memories of watching a horror starring Vincent Price.
Vincent Price. Yeah, that was sad when he passed away in the '90s. Lost a great legend. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
and
He's a fellow Midwesterner too. He's
oh,
from yeah. A lot of people thought some people thought he was from England, but he was from St. Louis, Missouri.
oh wow.
I'm from Kansas on the other side of the state, so pretty proud to hear about that. Like, oh man,
Oh, I'll say a little trivia from The Fly that when that movie, the trailer came out for that movie at the time, and everyone thought Vincent Price was going to be the star.
Oh yeah,
And of course, this was the movie, or one of the movies, I should say, that really put Vincent Price on the map to what we would know of him.
yeah. He's like this onerous villain. The cool thing about Vincent Price is that if you notice his movies, the only movies that he ever made in which he was like a monster or creature, I would say 2 of them, was the Dr. Phibes movies
Oh,
and House of Wax. Yeah. But other than that, other than those 2 movies, he basically used his own face, man. It's like he did not have to wear the makeup. He did not have to become a creature like we associate with Boris Karloff, where Boris Karloff played all these different creatures
yeah,
as well as, just really, despicable characters. Vincent Price was Vincent Price. And
yeah,
even though he's a very, very capable actor, and he could do everything. I mean, he did comedy. He was on Batman as Egghead.
oh yeah,
Yeah, of course, he was the maker of Edward Scissorhands' last movie.
yeah,
So versatile. He didn't even have to go that route, but he got into that role. He made that role his own, and that's what he was associated with. But the thing what was cool about Vincent Price was that he took it all in stride, man. He oh here he wasn't like, oh, I'm mad that I got pigeonholed these type of parts. He just loved it. He exalted in it because he had other things that took his interest. He was an art connoisseur. He wrote several cookbooks. He was a
yeah,
Renaissance. Like, I just do this to make a little bit of change so I can buy another piece of art because he was an art fanatic.
yeah.
But very graceful, very elegant. That voice was just, it was just golden. And,
Oh yeah,
and he committed to every character that he played, even like in The Fly. He played someone as benign as the scientist's brother in The Fly, but as
yeah,
he can capable a lot of cruelty on top of that.
yeah. And there was one other Vincent Price movie that just came up, The Invisible Man Returns, one of his earlier films. And that's a movie that it's not really mentioned enough, I should say. It's one of those movies that's not talked about enough, too.
Yeah, yeah. Because I think because for one thing, the person that made that role famous was Claude Rains,
Yeah,
and his character, as you know, was killed off. So I believe that Price's character earned this brother character, and this was that time in Vincent Price's career when he was under contract with Universal. He was with them for a short while. It was ironic because Universal Studios is known for making the monster movies. Okay, that was
yeah,
their bread and butter. Okay, and they held on to that market. And his early careers, his early career was playing The Invisible Man Returns, and also he did Tower of London.
Oh, okay, I remember that title.
Yeah, Tower of London, and I believe he played Clarence, if I'm not mistaken. Now, as you know, Basil Rathbone played the evil Richard III, and Boris Karloff was, this big lugging guy, this executioner guy. And Vincent Price is the one they put in the vat of wine and drowned him. And it was, and they said it was weird because Vincent almost died because Basil Rathbone and Boris Karloff used to throw a bunch of cigarettes and stuff in the wine. And then when Vincent got in there and they put the lid on, they clamped on top of the lid and laid on the lid to finish their lines, and it stuck. And Vincent could get out, but years later in the 60s, Vincent Price would be in another version of Tower of London in which he played Richard this time.
Oh.
And he was in 2 versions of Tower of London.
Was that the Roger Corman days?
Yeah, it was around during the time of Roger Corman days. The AIP times, American International Pictures.
Yeah.
I believe that's it. Yeah. AIP. Mm-hmm.
Let's see. Another movie from childhood that had like a big impact, I want to say, was, I guess I would say Godzilla, the original 1954 classic.
Yeah. Yeah, that first Godzilla movie was scary, man.
Yeah.
It was. I remember as a kid, they used to have Godzilla Week,
Yeah.
network TV, where they would show strength movies all week after school. So we would rush home after school to catch it and stuff. And crazy thing about it is that a lot of the Godzilla movies they showed were already well into the 60s. And during that time, Godzilla had become so popular that he became a favorite of the children.
Yeah.
So they would always put Godzilla in the role of the hero. Oh, Godzilla, good monster. These bad monsters like and Rodan, a Spiga and all that kind of stuff. But and we grew up watching Godzilla as the hero.
Yeah.
But then he turned around and showed us the original Godzilla, and he's like doing the most, man. He's wrecking up shop. And I'm looking at him, he's like, Godzilla's killing people. What is wrong with this? And it was shot in black and white, which really made it like a nightmare.
Yeah.
And the music, the first part, especially the American version with Raymond Burr,
Yeah.
the first thing you hear is that boom, 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 like the footsteps of Godzilla and that oboe. I'm like, this is crazy. But yeah, it took going back to that original to really feel the fear of Godzilla. And almost like King Kong, there are moments in Godzilla that still brings me recurrent nightmares. Like when he looks over the mountaintop, when you hear his footsteps, the people are hiking up the mountain,
Yeah.
and you footsteps, you see his head look over the mountain, looking at me like screaming. That's another one of those moments. And my daughter, when she was little, same thing happened to her. She was watching Godzilla. She grew up on the cartoon, loved Godzilla as the hero, and watched some of the Godzilla movies. Then in the 80s and in the 2000s, when they start going back to a more malevolent Godzilla, she did the same thing. She's like, but Godzilla, a friend. Why is Godzilla? And I'm like, oh man, I forgot. Yeah, that's what's going on. But it's one of those things I love, being able to pass down to my daughter. She's beginning to get an affinity for horror movies like her old man. So
That's awesome.
we were mentioning earlier about our first purchases, or when home video was available. What were some of the first movies we purchased?
Oh, okay. Let's see. One of the first movies I purchased. Let's see. That's a hard one.
Yeah. Because I know you got a stack, man. You got a crazy stack of movies back there. So
Yeah.
do you remember which one was the first one that ended up on the floor first before it stacked up, or the first one on the shelf?
That is that would be hard to answer. But I can say though that one of the first things I remember recording, like on VHS,
Oh yeah.
was like when I got my own VCR around that time. It was 2003, and then I remember the Toby Hooper movie, The Funhouse, was on TV, and then
Okay.
and so I recorded that one, and that was my introduction to that movie.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I think I bought mine years back, like '87, 1987, when I got my first VCR. I thought I was doing something, man. You know, before I had this thing, it was a RCA video disc player, and a
Uh-huh.
lot of people don't remember when those came out. And basically, it looked like a big cabinet, you know, like a cabinet, and the movies came in these big hard plastic covers inside it. You never saw it, you never touched the disc. So the thing is, you take the disc and you slide it in the machine, and somehow the machine holds on to the disc. And so when you pull the plastic cover off, the disc stays inside the machine, and it played movies.
Oh.
So that first thing, you know, the RCA video player, and I had King Kong, of course, and a lot of other movies, but you could not, you know, record on it. So when I bought my VCR, man, I was like, all right, you know, everything is going. It was two head VCR, so that means when you press pause, it wasn't a clean pause. It had like, but the movies that made me decide to start my horror collection was when Universal Studios started to reissue out the monster movies. Now, if I was looking, I remember at that time I was looking for some horror, Universal horror titles like Frankenstein and Dracula, but hard to find them. And next thing you know, almost like within a week, they came out with this whole new reissue. They had these boxes that were redesigned boxes. They look really cool, man. You know, if you look at the United States stamps and stuff like that, it was a whole string of them. And a lot of the rare Universal movies that you couldn't find on video was now available. So
Yeah.
not only did they have Frankenstein, like the uncut version of Frankenstein, you know, where he throws the little girl in the lake, but they
Oh.
had Dracula. They had the Spanish version of Dracula. They had the Invisible Man, and each cover of those boxes made you just want to buy them. So I'm like, okay, great. Universal knew what I was looking for. I was buying each one like a new one each week, man. Next thing you know, my collection just grew. You know.
Yeah. And those old Universal monster movies. Oh, there's classics.
Yeah, yeah. Because it took a lot of innovation and I would say, you know, a lot of originality to create the look of horror movies, and because these movies are the first time these movies were coming out, you know.
Yeah.
Besides like Caligari and Nosferatu and a lot of the
Yeah.
stuff that was Germany and everything, these guys were pioneers of establishing aesthetic, that look of horror movies that now take for what we expect from horror movies. You know, the fall going over the graveyards, the headstone, you know, the wolf howling in it. They
Yeah.
created these that we love, you know, that instill upon us that sense of creepiness. So even though people say, well, Universal movies aren't scary anymore. No, they weren't. They're not scary because of the way movies are now. But they had that sense of mystique about it. They had that charm about it, the look of it that gave you that creepy feeling up and down your spine when you watched it. You
Yeah.
know? So I love that aesthetic, that whole gothic.
Yeah. And also want to mention that when Dracula and Frankenstein came out, and this was the beginning of like the sound in movies, that sound era, and just
Yeah.
and coming out from the silent movie era.
Yeah.
And when you watch Dracula, you could tell that there's not a whole lot of music in it.
Yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right. They didn't have a soundtrack at the time. And if you look at the style, the way it was filmed, it was as if the director, Todd Browning,
Yeah.
did not know how to really utilize the versatility of the camera. You know, he had a lot of still camera shots, the Dracula in the distance and stuff like that. But as far as having mobile camera, the camera wasn't really mobile. It was like stationary, taking all these long shots. And that kind of added to the movie because it gave it that sense of strangeness. But as movie techniques started to improve and movie aesthetics started to improve, now it looks kind of dated, but
Yeah.
it still has a nice form to it. And you mentioned about the sound. Yeah, they were just starting to really revolutionize the sound quality, and it was pretty new. And even when Frankenstein came out, there was no music in the background.
Yeah.
Okay. But as you realize, when The Bride of Frankenstein came out, same director James Well, Franz Waxman, I think, did the music for it, and that's the first Frankenstein movie that started to have a soundtrack that was underscoring the story,
Oh.
and is really famous. So if you look at Frankenstein and look at Bride of Frankenstein in terms of the music helping to tell the story, it was a big change, big leap.
Speaking of the Bride of Frankenstein, I remember the classic scene where the Bride of Frankenstein is introduced.
Oh yeah, she's like looking around, and he's like, friend, and she's like, rejecting biggest Hollywood history, man. I felt
Yeah.
so bad.
On the way the. Oh, sorry. What were you gonna say?
No, I said it felt so bad for the way he was treated in that, man. It was like, oh
Yeah.
wow, yeah.
Yeah. And the way the music plays over the moment.
Yeah, and the charm of that movie, you still had, what's his name, Colin Clive come in. They had Valerie Dobson, I think, was the wife. She wasn't the same wife that in the first one. I think Mae Clark played the wife of Henry Frankenstein in the first one.
Oh.
They changed to Valerie Hobson in Bride of Frankenstein, but she did an excellent job. I mean, she was very attractive, and the star of Bride of Frankenstein had to be Dr. Pretorius, Ernest Thesiger. He took the film, man. I mean, he stole it out from under Karloff. It was being sadistic, necrophile that was trying to create life and wanted to collaborate with Henry Frankenstein. And to this day, man, anytime we throw in Bride of Frankenstein, we all look to see his scenes because he was a big scene stealer in that movie. Yeah.